In a past life, I gave up my first-class cabin on the graduation cruise to my best friend. As a result, the ship sank to the bottom of the sea, and I was wrongly blamed and drowned in a tragic accident. Given a second chance at life, I faked an illness to cancel my ticket. As I watched them scramble to board the ship and laugh at me, I silently pressed the record button. The cramping pain in my stomach was imaginary, but the cold sweat that felt like needle pricks was very real. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, a cup of warm water in my hands, staring at the pale, bloodless face reflected back at me. I didn't even need to rub my eyes, the dark circles naturally forming beneath them were realistic enough. My phone buzzed on the sink, its glow cutting through the dimness of the cramped apartment. It was a WeChat voice message from Peichi. The moment I tapped to play it, my earpiece was immediately filled with her unmistakable excitement and eagerness. "Nora, are you really not going? That's the top-of-the-line graduation cruise around the island. Liam and I both think you're missing out. If you're really too sick to get out of bed, Liam and I might just use your ticket to upgrade our seats." The rising inflection at the end of her voice carried a sense of excitement that almost seemed to spill out of the screen. I gave a slight smile and slowly swallowed the warm water, moistening my slightly parched throat. "Well, it's acute gastroenteritis. The doctor said I have to stay in the hospital for observation and for fluids, so there's no way I'll make it to the boarding gate tonight." My voice was hoarse and weak. It seemed to take an enormous effort to squeeze out every word. "The ticket is in the document folder in the cabinet by the entryway. You guys can take it." Immediately, there was a rustling sound of fabric rubbing against itself on the other end of the line, accompanied by Peichi's hushed but unmistakable laughter. "Oh my. Well then, just take it easy while you're on 4 at the hospital, don't push yourself. With something as big as a graduation trip getting derailed like this, I guess you just aren't meant to enjoy it." With a beep, the call was hung up very abruptly. I stared at the phone screen as it went dark, my eyes showing not the slightest flicker of emotion. In my previous life, I had also been lying in the hospital because of this sudden bout of gastroenteritis. But back then, instead of canceling my ticket, I had called Liam in tears, begging him to stay ashore with me. What did Liam say at the time? The man's cold and impatient tone from that moment naturally came to mind. "Nora, everyone's been planning this graduation trip for a full half-year. We can't let the whole class's fun be ruined just because you got food poisoning. Paige wasn't able to get a first-class ticket, and your ticket is just going to go to waste. You might as well give it to her." Right after that, Paige naturally took over the conversation, implying both directly and indirectly that I was making a mountain out of a molehill and spoiling everyone's fun. In the end, I gave in and, despite my illness, managed to transfer my first-class ticket. But what awaited me was the horrific maritime disaster I had witnessed on live news footage from my hospital bed, and the ensuing barrage of online abuse and scapegoating. They placed all the blame for the cruise ship's overcrowding and unauthorized route change squarely on the original ticket holder, the person who didn't board due to illness but secretly transferred the cabin. Those vicious private messages and the journalists' cameras and microphones drove me into a corner. Knock, knock, knock. A sudden knock at the door interrupted my train of thought. I walked to the entryway and looked out through the peephole. Sure enough, it was Liam. He was wearing a well-tailored casual suit, carrying 2 elegantly wrapped fruit baskets, and wearing a standard, slightly insincere expression of concern. As soon as the door opened a crack, he eagerly squeezed his way in, his gaze immediately falling on the document folder sitting on the shoe cabinet in the living room. "Nora, why do you look so pale? What did the doctor say?" Liam said, placing the fruit basket on the coffee table with perfect ease, though his gaze kept drifting involuntarily toward the entryway. I leaned against the living room wall, my arms crossed over my chest, my gaze resting calmly on his face. "The doctor said it's dehydration caused by acute gastroenteritis, and I have to finish 3 bags of 4 fluids tonight. I can't move a muscle." I pointed toward the shoe cabinet in the entryway. "The document bag you asked for is right there. The ship ticket and a copy of my ID are inside. Grab it and head straight to the pier. Don't miss the boarding time." I caught the fleeting glimmer of joy in Liam's eyes. He quickly walked over, took the folder, pulled out the first-class ticket, and after confirming it was correct, he couldn't help but let a smile spread across his face. "That's such a shame. We'd actually planned to watch the sunrise together on our graduation trip. Liam sighed, but his hands moved quickly as he stuffed the folder into his backpack. But don't worry, once I'm on the ship, I'll definitely take lots of pictures of the ocean and send them to you. Try not to worry too much while you're at the hospital. Seeing how impatient and eager he looked, I spoke in a tone so flat it sounded as if I were talking to a stranger. No need to take any more photos. The signal's bad at the hospital, and I need to rest. Liam seemed a little surprised by my coldness. Usually at times like this, I'd feel a bit down or remind him to be careful. But today I was as still as a pond, and my emotionless eyes made him feel inexplicably uneasy. He let out a nervous laugh to hide the strange look in his eyes. All right, then. You take care of your four. I've got to hurry over and meet up with Paige. Everyone's waiting at the pier. Well, have a safe trip. I didn't even walk him to the door. I just muttered those 4 words indifferently. Liam opened the door and strode out. As the security door clicked shut, the entire apartment fell silent in an instant. I walked over to the window, pulled back the half-drawn curtains, and watched the figure below, carrying a suitcase and walking with a light step, disappear into the night, until a black ride-hailing car pulled up in front of him and picked him up. Just then, my phone vibrated. It was a moment's post from Paige. The accompanying image is a close-up of 2 first-class cruise tickets, set against the backdrop of a luxurious cruise ship's glittering boarding gate. The caption reads, "Stepping in for someone at the last minute to embark on a perfect romantic cruise. Thank you for joining me. At Liam." The post quickly garnered countless likes and envious comments. I opened the comments section, casually took a few screenshots to save, then silenced my phone and tossed it onto the couch. I turned around, pulled a black external hard drive out of my desk drawer, and connected it to my computer. The blue glow of the screen reflected in my impassive eyes, displaying a dense list of all the recent financial irregularities and records of unauthorized modifications for this luxury cruise ship, the Ocean Star, as well as the key evidence of the severely deteriorated life-saving equipment, evidence that, in my previous life, had only come to light after the ship sank. In his previous life, Liam and the cruise line had worked together to cover up these matters so thoroughly that they even destroyed all paper records immediately after the disaster occurred. But this time, not only did I get a complete digital backup ahead of schedule, but I also set up a scheduled send for the Port Supervisory Administration's tip-off email address while I was at it. The clock's hands pointed to exactly 9 p.m. A stifling breeze suddenly swept in through the window, causing the houseplants on the windowsill to rustle. A muffled rumble of thunder echoed faintly in the distant night sky, while that colossal vessel, carrying countless revelers, was now slowly pulling away from the harbor and heading full speed into the pitch-black depths of the ocean. I watched the flashing send progress bar on the screen, a faint smile playing at the corners of my mouth, then picked up the glass of water on the table and took a sip of lukewarm water. The notification sounds from the WeChat group haven't stopped since a little while ago. I swiped across the screen to find the WeChat group for our high school graduation trip buzzing with activity. Paige had posted several short videos showing the inside of a first-class cabin on the cruise ship. The footage featured a cabin with Persian rugs, a carved solid wood coffee table, and a bottle of Moët and Chandon champagne on the table, all of which highlighted the space's luxury and spaciousness. Oh my gosh, this is just too awesome. I was just thinking how cramped economy class was, and now we've gotten a painless upgrade. Thanks to that person who's feeling under the weather for making this happen for us. Paige's voice was laced with undisguised pride, accompanied by Liam's deep laughter in the background. A string of supportive chat bubbles quickly popped up in the group chat, with several classmates who were usually close to Paige leaving comments one after another. Some people just aren't lucky. They had a perfectly good graduation cruise, but they ended up in the hospital after eating at a street stall. Exactly, it's like taking up space without doing anything. Good thing Liam acted decisively. Otherwise, such a great first-class seat would have gone to waste. One sarcastic remark after another rained down on the group chat like snowflakes, all aimed squarely at me, who was absent due to acute gastroenteritis. In my previous life, seeing all that snide sarcasm would probably have made me shake with rage. I might even have been unable to resist arguing with them in the group chat, only to end up with a reputation for being petty and a killjoy. But now, I just gave it a quick glance, tapped the screen lightly with my finger, took a screenshot of the entire chat history and group member list, and saved those short videos showing off the cabin while I was at it. My phone vibrated. It was a private chat. Liam's name popped up, followed immediately by a photo. It was a selfie of him and Paige on the deck of a cruise ship, with the brightly lit coastline in the background. They were standing very close together. Paige was holding a wine glass and laughing so hard she was shaking. "Nora, look, the sea breeze tonight is especially pleasant. It's a shame you couldn't make it. But don't worry, Peach and I will make sure to experience all the fun things this cruise ship has to offer for you." Looking at this message, which carried a hint of defiance and boastfulness, I didn't reply right away. Instead, I picked up the glass of warm water beside me and took a leisurely sip. A few seconds later, I replied with 3 words. "Have fun." I sent him those 4 simple words, and it was as if he'd punched a bag of cotton. It took a while before Liam finally replied. "Okay, then make sure to take your medicine and get some rest. We'll bring you a gift when we dock." I casually placed my phone face down on the table and stopped paying attention to those pointless attempts to probe me. Out in the open sea beyond the harbor, the wind and waves were quietly growing stronger. Outside the window, the tree branches were bent low by the gale, emitting a muffled rustling sound. I walked over to my desk, pulled open a drawer, and found an internal industry audit report lying quietly inside, one that had been deliberately concealed in my previous life. It was crucial documentation I'd managed to purchase at great personal cost from a group of retired sailors following the shipwreck in my previous life. It contained irrefutable evidence detailing the Ocean Star's overloading practices and the chronic neglect of its lifeboats. In my previous life, I regarded this information as my only weapon for revenge. But before I could hand it over, Liam tricked me into handing it over to him, and he destroyed it. In this life, however, not only have I long since made multiple cloud backups, but just half an hour before the cruise ship set sail tonight, I sent the key evidence directly to the inbox of the head of the Maritime Safety and Supervision Administration via an encrypted email account. The landline on the desk suddenly emitted a shrill sound, shattering the silence in the room. I raised an eyebrow slightly and picked up the receiver. "Is this Miss Nora?" "This is the Port Maritime Safety Emergency Center," said a serious and urgent voice on the other end of the line. "We have just received an anonymous tip regarding the cruise ship Ocean Star alleging serious violations of overloading regulations and fire safety hazards. Since you were the original booker of a first-class cabin on that ship, we need to verify some details with you." I held the microphone, my tone so calm it didn't waver in the slightest. I was the one who reported it. Not only do I have a written statement, but I also have the cabin transfer records from when they boarded the ship tonight and the on-site video. It's all in the file package I sent over. There was a noticeable pause on the other end of the line. Clearly, they hadn't expected the whistleblower to admit it so readily. "All right, Miss Nora. Thank you for your cooperation. We've already dispatched an emergency investigation team, and they're currently trying to contact the captain of the cruise ship to arrange for a mandatory return for inspection." "Don't bother trying to contact the captain," I said, gazing out the window at the sky gradually turning pitch black. My voice as faint as a wisp of smoke. "They've turned off the ship's satellite positioning system to get out to sea before the typhoon hits, and they're now heading full speed toward the open ocean." There was an instant gasp on the other end of the line, and the voice took on an extremely grave tone. "Are you sure? If that's true, this ship has already entered the area of severe convective weather for which the meteorological station just issued a red alert." "A red alert?" I repeated the phrase, my tone as calm as if I were discussing tomorrow's weather. "A red alert for heavy rain was posted on the Maritime Safety Administration's public weather radar map half an hour ago." Liam and the others, in pursuit of their so-called romantic graduation trip, pushed the limits of the maritime ban and left the harbor anyway. The maritime official on the other end of the line began breathing noticeably more rapidly, and the sound of typing came through clearly over the receiver. "Ms. Nora, this is an urgent matter. Through what channels did you obtain the evidence regarding the unauthorized modifications and aging life-saving equipment you just mentioned? We need to immediately assess its authenticity so we can request that the Coast Guard intercept the vessel." I've listed the sources of all the evidence and their hash codes on the first page of the email attachment, I said, turning to look at the stream of data flashing across the computer screen. Every audit report on financial irregularities and fire hazards bears the electronic signature and official stamp of the relevant handler at Ocean Shipping Company. If you're still concerned, you can send someone directly to the CFO's office at the shipping company. I've also included the safe combination in the email. It felt as if the air had frozen at that moment. There was silence on the other end of the line for a full 3 seconds, followed by the sound of a chair being pulled back sharply. You even know the combination to their internal safe? The staff member's voice betrayed a hint of undisguised shock. I didn't go into much detail. I just said matter-of-factly, there were major problems with last quarter's internal audit. To cover up the incident, they kept the books in a very sloppy manner. Time is running out. If you wait to go through the standard approval process, that ship will probably have already sailed well beyond the territorial sea baseline by now. All right. We'll activate the highest level emergency response plan immediately. The Coast Guard vessels are already on standby at the port. Thank you for reporting this promptly. I heard a beep busy tone coming from the receiver. So I slowly placed the landline phone back on its cradle. Outside the window, the wind and rain were raging. The once serene night sky looked as if someone had splashed ink across it, a pitch-black expanse that seemed impossible to dispel. Occasionally, a few pale flashes of lightning tore through the sky, stretching the shadows in the living room to their limits. Paige's WeChat Moments feed was still showing that group photo from half an hour ago. The number of likes kept climbing, and the comments section was filled with jeers of envy, jealousy, and resentment. Those people had no idea that the perfect, luxurious graduation party they were talking about was, at that very moment, plunging headlong into a vortex of death woven from human greed and meteorological disasters. Just then, the doorbell rang without warning. The rapid, muffled knocking sounded particularly jarring in the empty hallway, accompanied by several rough shoves that made the door rattle. I furrowed my brow slightly and walked to the entryway to look outside through the peephole. Standing outside the door were not the building management staff or a food delivery person, but several strangers in jackets who looked anxious. The man in the lead, a middle-aged man, was speaking loudly into his phone, checking the address. Is this the place? Yes. It's apartment 201 in Unit 3 of this building. Knock on the door, hurry up. I paused for 2 seconds, then opened the security door a crack. Who are you looking for? My voice carried through the security door, without a trace of panic. The middle-aged man standing outside the door looked up abruptly. When he saw me, he visibly let out a sigh of relief and produced an ID card from the Maritime Investigation Bureau. Hello, I'm Zhao Gang, head of the Special Investigation Unit at the Maritime Bureau. We just received your encrypted tip and phone call. We need to verify some urgent information regarding the Ocean Star in person. Could you please open the door? I watched as rainwater from the few people standing outside trickled down the hems of their clothes and dripped onto the floor tiles. Without saying another word, I reached out, unlocked the security latch, and swung the security door wide open. Come on in. The shoe covers are next to the shoe cabinet. I stepped aside to let them through. Zhao Gang strode into the living room with 2 young investigators and glanced around the somewhat Spartan but neatly organized bachelor apartment. His gaze finally settled on the open laptop on my desk, which was displaying a real-time simulation of maritime radar activity. Miss Nora, time is of the essence. So let's get straight to the point. Zhao Gang pulled up a chair and sat down, his expression as serious as if he were examining a top-secret document. In your tip-off letter, you mentioned that the Ocean Star was not only overloaded but had also recently tampered with the lifeboat maintenance records without authorization. What exactly happened? I poured 3 glasses of warm water and set them on the coffee table, then sat down on the armchair, folding my hands in my lap. To cut costs, the shipping company that owns the Ocean Star kept all 8 of its old lifeboats, which should have been scrapped last quarter, simply giving the hulls a fresh coat of paint. As for where the money went, I looked up and met Zhao Gang's gaze directly. It all ended up in the private pocket of their vice president, who happens to be Liam's own uncle. Zhao Gang's hand, which was holding the water glass, froze suddenly, and his face instantly turned ashen. No wonder they dared to force their way out of port during a typhoon warning. They're not just operating in violation of regulations, this is a criminal offense. Not only that, I added calmly. To avoid a maritime inspection tonight, they kept two sets of records, one for the passenger list and another for the actual number of cabins. What I'm sending you now is the real passenger list from their internal server. The actual number of passengers in first class exceeds the quota by 30%. A young female investigator standing nearby was quickly tapping away on her tablet. A moment later, she suddenly looked up, her voice trembling slightly. Team leader, we just received a message from headquarters. The *Ocean Star* forcibly shut down its onboard AIS system half an hour ago, and its radar signal has completely disappeared in the storm zone. Zhao Gang jumped to his feet, and the water glass in his hand slammed down hard on the coffee table, sending water splashing everywhere. The signal's completely gone? Zhao Gang's voice suddenly rose, and the air in the office seemed to be sucked out in an instant. The young female investigator turned her tablet screen toward us. The green cursor that had previously marked the Ocean Star was now a blinding blank space, surrounded by a radar map of the typhoon's heavy rainfall, which appeared a deep, purplish red. Yes, team leader. The last location report showed that it was near the waters off Dragon's Den Island when it encountered a sudden storm system of at least level 12. The meteorological station has just confirmed that sea conditions in that area are extremely rough, with waves several meters high. I sat on the armchair, my fingers holding the glass of warm water, not even trembling slightly. In my previous life, at this very moment, I had already been sitting in a hospital bed, hearing the terrible news of the cruise ship running aground and sinking through a live TV news broadcast. But this time, I was sitting in the living room, watching with my own eyes as they cut off our last lifeline with their own hands. Zhao Gang spun around abruptly, his piercing gaze fixed on me. Miss Nora, since you were able to accurately predict their course and their violations, you must know exactly how many people are on board, as well as the maximum capacity of those old lifeboats, right? The total number of passengers on board was around 450, but according to calculations based on two sets of internal invoices, the number of passengers exceeding capacity in first class and VIP cabins was over 60. I set down my glass, my tone completely unruffled. As for those 8 old lifeboats that were freshly repainted, the welds on their hulls will crack immediately if they encounter crosswinds and waves exceeding force 9. In other words, their so-called luxurious escape pods, the very ones they take such pride in, are nothing more than a series of iron coffins when faced with a real natural disaster. Several investigators in the office all gasped in unison. Zhao Gang gritted his teeth and, without hesitation, grabbed the encrypted satellite phone on the table. Report to the East China Sea Search and Rescue Center immediately. Activate the Level 1 Maritime Disaster Search and Rescue Contingency Plan, and notify the Coast Guard to dispatch 2 main icebreaker search and rescue vessels to rush at full speed to the waters off Longshu Island. Amid the static coming from the other end of the line and the rapid-fire commands, the entire living room instantly turned into a makeshift frontline command center. I looked out the window at the night view, blurred by the torrential rain, when the screen of my phone suddenly lit up on the desk. That was the last message Paige sent. The timestamp showed it was sent 5 minutes ago. There was no text, just a photo. It showed the cruise ship's deck amid a raging storm, with waves in the distance resembling a ferocious beast. Paige and Liam were wearing life jackets, their faces still bearing panicked yet forced smiles. The caption was a line of broken text. Nora, the ship seems to have hit something. Help. The moment I sent the photo, the message the other person is typing appeared at the top of the chat window. But this status lasted a full half-minute, and no text was ever sent. This was followed by a notification that the connection had been completely lost. I turned my phone screen toward Zhao Gang and said calmly, "No need to guess, they hit a reef." Zhao Gang snatched the phone, looked at the photo and the time on the screen, and turned pale. "This is the last image of them before they went missing. Track these coordinates immediately." The tension in the room reached a fever pitch as the printer began spewing out a thick stack of evidence regarding the Ocean Star's internal finances and corruption. I stood up, walked to the window, and watched as lightning streaked across the distant sky. The rumbling thunder sounded like the death knell of fate. In my past life, they trampled on my dignity as they boarded the ship to revel, pushing me into an abyss from which there was no return. In this life, I personally sent them down the path of self-destruction they had chosen for themselves. Zhao Gang put down the satellite phone, turned to look at me, and there was a hint of complexity and awe in his eyes. "Miss Nora, the Coast Guard vessel has already set out, but the winds and waves are too strong, the search and rescue operation. I'm afraid it won't go very smoothly. If any survivors are rescued, we'll need your full cooperation with the subsequent investigation and evidence collection. As long as it's a legitimate collaboration, I'm always ready to cooperate." I turned around and met his gaze. "But before that happens, the masterminds behind the scenes, those who tried to cover up the truth about the accident and attempted to buy their way out with money, not a single one of them will get away." Zhao Gang nodded vigorously. "Rest assured, with this irrefutable evidence, the Maritime Safety Administration and the Economic Crime Investigation Department will set up a task force overnight. Not a single executive from the shipping company involved will get a good night's sleep tonight." The rain outside the window was falling harder and harder, accompanied by howling winds, as if it were about to completely engulf the entire city. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the thick clouds, the downpour gradually subsided, and the air was filled with the scent of sea salt mixed with damp earth. Inside the Maritime Bureau's temporary office, the last sheet of paper spewed out by the printer fell onto a thick stack of documents. I gently unplugged the black portable hard drive in front of me and pushed it toward Zhao Gang, who was sitting across from me with two deep dark circles under his eyes. "This is a backup of the hash values for all the original documents, as well as a mirror image of the shipping company's internal servers." My voice betrayed no sign of fatigue from staying up all night. "It includes the offshore account transaction histories and private email correspondence from the past 3 years for all key individuals involved in the case, including Liam's uncle, Lin Yuanshan, the shipping company's vice president." Zhao Gang took the small hard drive in both hands. As if he were holding a burden weighing 1,000 June, he looked up at the young woman standing before him, who had not shown the slightest sign of panic from start to finish, and the respect in his eyes was impossible to hide. "Miss Nora, I've been in maritime investigations for 20 years and have handled countless cases, big and small, but you're the first client I've ever seen who's built such a watertight chain of evidence." Zhao Gang took a deep breath and carefully locked the hard drive inside his briefcase. "Lin Yuanshan was taken into custody by economic crime investigators at the airport last night, but he's still trying to wriggle out of it, insisting that the cruise ship's captain changed the route on his own. With this image of the internal server's data from you, he's lost even his last shred of cover." I picked up the paper cup and took a sip of the plain water, which had long since gone cold, my tone unflappable. Lin Yuanshan has always been in the habit of shifting risks onto his subordinates. In last quarter's lifeboat refurbishment contract, although a frontline supervisor signed it, the final dividend account was registered under Lin Yuanshan's wife's name. As long as we trace this account, not a single big fish in the entire chain of corruption will get away. A female investigator standing nearby hurried in, holding the latest facts, her expression grave. "Team leader, the search and rescue fleet has just sent back its first report from the waters off Dragon's Den Island. They recovered several floating suitcases and life jackets at the scene, and, on the outer casing of the combination lock on one of the suitcases, Liam's initials were engraved." At that moment, the air seemed to freeze. Zhao Gang instinctively glanced at me, only to find that my expression hadn't changed in the slightest. I hadn't even lifted an eyelid. "What's in the suitcase?" I set down my paper cup and broke the silence. The female investigator swallowed hard and handed over the facts. In addition to several pieces of high-end clothing that were completely soaked, there was also a water-damaged cell phone and a waterproof briefcase. Inside the briefcase were the fake safety self-inspection reports they'd rushed to prepare overnight, intending to use them to pass the maritime inspection after docking. I took the fax and glanced at it. It bore the shipping company's official seal, and Liam's full name was clearly signed in the signature field. In my previous life, this fraudulent safety self-inspection report had smoothly passed the review, only to be used against me after the shipwreck as court evidence to slander me for failing to report what I knew. But in this life, before it even saw the light of day, it became the irrefutable evidence that sealed the fate of this group. "The chain of evidence is complete," I said calmly as I pushed the fax back onto the desk. "The false self-inspection report, the internal dual sets of invoices, the offshore account transaction records, and the record of the mandatory return-to-port order received by the Maritime Safety Administration tonight. Even if they somehow manage to survive out at sea, They'll still face a criminal trial where they'll be charged with multiple offenses. Zhao Gang's gaze toward me had completely changed. It was the kind of solemnity and admiration one feels when facing a mature and formidable opponent. He stood up and solemnly extended his hand to me. Miss Nora, thank you for your decisive contribution to the investigation of this maritime accident. The upcoming legal proceedings may require you to appear in court as a key witness. Are you ready? I reached out and gently clasped his hand. His fingertips were slightly cool, but his tone was unusually firm. I'll be ready at any time. Not only will I make them pay for this disaster, but I'll also ensure that the dark secrets they've maliciously concealed are brought fully to light. Just as they were speaking, the office's heavy glass door was suddenly pushed open from the outside, and a middle-aged woman stumbled in, her hair disheveled, her eyes red and swollen, clutching a missing person flyer tightly in her hand. She was a relative of one of the passengers. After hearing the news on the news, she had asked around all the way here. Please, save my daughter. She's only 22 years old. She boarded that ship with Liam and the others. The moment the woman saw Zhao Gang in his uniform, she completely broke down. Her legs gave way, and she was about to fall to her knees. Quick as a flash, I grabbed her arm, steadied her, and handed her a tissue. The woman looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, her expression one of shock. I looked at her, my voice gentle yet imbued with a strange strength. Auntie, please don't cry just yet. We're doing everything we can to find them, and none of the people who harmed them will get away. The woman clutched my hand as if it were her last hope. Who are you? Can you really help us? I'm Nora. I looked at the woman in front of me, who was sobbing uncontrollably. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a mysterious, reassuring strength. Ma'am, what's your daughter's name? Did she mention anything to you about safety hazards on the ship before she boarded? The woman wiped away her tears with a trembling hand and said, her voice choked with emotion, her name was Jo Min. Before she left, she complained to me on the phone that Liam had forced them to move from their originally assigned safe cabins to standard cabins below the waterline just to save money. I even told her not to hold a grudge against rich people. Who would have thought something like this would happen? Zhao Gang, standing nearby, looked slightly taken aback and immediately gave a subtle nod to the female investigator beside him. Check Zhou Min's cabin access logs and see if they're related to Liam's access rights adjustments. There's no need to investigate any further. I let go of the woman's hand and straightened up, to make room for Paige in first class. Liam not only transferred my ticket but also secretly tampered with the seating assignments for the rest of our group, shoving an ordinary classmate like Zhou Min, who had no connections, into a section of the ship that was understaffed with lifeboats. This was a complete and utter series of murders. The oppressive atmosphere in the office instantly dropped to freezing point. Upon hearing this, the woman's legs gave way and she nearly collapsed again. She grabbed my sleeve, her eyes red-rimmed. Miss, since you know all this so clearly, you must have a way to help, right? They can't just die for nothing. I took her cold fingers in my hand and said firmly, Auntie, rest assured. Not only will I make Liam and those behind the scenes face the full force of the law, but I'll also expose every shady deal behind this ship. Zhao Gang looked at me, a hint of admiration flashing in his eyes. Miss Nora is right. Right now, the Coast Guard search and rescue vessels are doing everything they can to recover the bodies. But the Maritime Safety Administration's internal investigation alone isn't enough. We need to unite the families of the victims to form a collective force of social oversight. Only then can we thoroughly shake up the deeply entrenched shipping industry. Join forces with the family? The woman paused for a moment, then nodded vigorously. As long as it means getting justice for my daughter, I'm willing to do anything. I turned around, walked over to my desk, picked up a blank sheet of A4 paper and a black ballpoint pen, and quickly scribbled a few large characters. Emergency exit records. A single trial over a maritime disaster is nowhere near enough to stop those profit-hungry capitalists from taking reckless risks again. I pushed the piece of paper with the words written on it toward Zhao Gang and the woman. I plan to join forces with all the victims' families and independent legal aid volunteers to formally establish a public interest oversight platform called Safety Channel Archives. We will focus on collecting, disclosing, and continuously monitoring the safety compliance of luxury cruise ships and passenger routes worldwide, ensuring that every loophole is brought to light. Zhao Gang looked at the name on the paper and couldn't help but clap his hands in admiration. Safety Corridor Archives. What a great name! With irrefutable official evidence to back it up, plus the voices of the families fighting for their rights. Once this platform goes live, it will send shockwaves through the entire shipping industry. It's not just about the shock, I said, gently setting the pen down on the desk, my gaze calm and intense. I want to make it clear to those who think they can bribe safety regulators with money, human lives are not bargaining chips. And no one will ever again be allowed to use power and lies to cover up a disaster as if it were an accident. Zhou Min's mother wiped away her tears, looked at my young but determined face, and asked in a trembling voice, "Young lady, can ordinary people like us really stand up to those big companies worth over 100 million? We might not have been a match for them before," I said, tilting my chin slightly as my gaze fell on the rising sun outside the window. "But starting today, they'll not only face the judgment of the law, but also the watchful eyes of countless people. As long as we don't back down, the empire of wealth they've built could crumble at any moment." The sunlight outside finally pierced through the thick haze, streaming onto the glass window and casting a dazzling golden glow. Zhao Gang's cell phone suddenly began to vibrate violently. He answered the call, and after listening for a few moments, his expression changed abruptly. "What? A Coast Guard vessel rescued a survivor just outside the rocky area of Longshu Island?" The atmosphere in the office instantly flared up again, and everyone's eyes turned to Zhao Gang at once. "Who are the survivors? What's the situation now?" Zhao Gang strode quickly to his desk and asked urgently into the satellite phone. The voice on the other end of the line was clearly distorted by the sound of wind and waves. "This is the deputy tour leader on board. His vital signs are currently stable, but after drifting at sea all night, he's in a state of extreme shock and has been rambling incoherently, insisting on seeing someone from the shipping company." According to his preliminary account, after the cruise ship ran aground, Liam and Paige, in an attempt to secure the last 2 private lifeboats in first class, forcibly pushed a sailor on duty overboard. Suddenly, a collective gasp filled the office. When Zhou Min's mother heard this, her vision went dark, and she nearly collapsed right there on the floor. I acted quickly, catching her and guiding her into a chair, then pouring her a glass of warm water. "Did you hear that?" I looked at the woman, who was still shaken, my tone calm yet carrying immense weight. Not only did they violate regulations, but when faced with disaster, their inherent selfishness and ugliness were laid bare. People like that aren't worth a single tear of yours. Zhou Min's mother took the paper cup with trembling hands. Tears welled up once more, but the despair in her eyes was gradually replaced by a cold, bitter hatred. How could they be so cruel? My daughter trusted them so much. Zhao Gang hung up the satellite phone and looked at me with a serious expression. "Miss Nora, the Coast Guard vessel is heading toward shore with the survivors. This deputy team leader not only has direct testimony from Liam and Paige about their malicious scheming and hoarding of life-saving resources on board, but also knows the hiding place of the ledgers documenting their secret transfer of company assets. Has the Economic Crime Investigation Division sought your opinion? As the absolutely key witness in this case, do you need to accompany us to the dock?" I set the paper cup on the table, calmly picked up my coat from the back of the chair, and put it on. "Let's go. There are some scores to settle. Since they weren't able to settle them completely out at sea, the law will settle them with them, one by one, in court." Half an hour later, the Maritime Safety Administration's black official vehicle came to a smooth stop outside the temporary emergency command center at the pier. The lingering mist over the water had not yet completely cleared, and several large white vessels bearing the words Coast Guard were slowly pulling up to the shore. A long police tape had already been strung across the pier. Ambulances flashed their glaring red and blue lights, and the air was thick with the pungent smell of seawater and disinfectant. As soon as the car door swung open, a biting sea breeze hit me in the face, ruffling the strands of hair on my forehead. Keeping my composure, I walked across the wet concrete floor, following Zhao Gang to the outside of the temporary medical tent. On the stretcher, the deputy team leader, who had miraculously survived, was wrapped head to toe in a thick blanket, his face as pale as paper and his lips frozen purple. When he caught sight of me, his clouded pupils suddenly contracted, and he began struggling violently as if he'd seen a ghost. Aren't you supposed to be at the hospital getting in for? How did you? Why didn't you get on the boat? I looked down at him from above, my eyes showing not the slightest flicker of emotion, only a bottomless calm. Because I thought that ship was filthy, and I thought your lives weren't worth anything. The deputy team leader opened his mouth, let out a strange hoo-hoo sound from his throat, and then his eyes rolled back as he passed out completely. The medical personnel standing nearby immediately rushed forward to administer first aid, while Zhao Gang took the opportunity to reach into the pocket of his soaked jacket and pull out a waterproof seal bag, which, to his surprise, contained an encrypted USB drive. Miss Nora, it looks like there's no need for a trial. This is definitely the final ledger that Lin Yuanshan and Liam hid overseas. Zhao Gang handed me the sealed bag to examine, his tone brimming with the excitement of having finally closed in on them. I took it and glanced at it. The text on the label was clear. In my previous life, this USB drive wasn't discovered by chance until 3 years after the incident. But this time, it fell into the hands of the investigation team the very next day after the disaster. I gently handed the USB drive back to Zhao Gang, my gaze sweeping past the dense crowd toward the churning horizon in the distance. The nightmares from his past life, which had clung to him like a festering sore, the suffocating feeling of being maliciously slandered, and the despair of having nowhere to escape in the whirlpool of public opinion, were all shattered to pieces at that very moment by the sound of the waves crashing against the reefs. My phone vibrated gently in my pocket. It was a reminder from the bank that my investment had matured, as well as a contract renewal from my landlord. Without Liam's insincere greetings or Paige's subtle jabs, the world was quieter than ever before. Zhao Gang put the evidence away and turned to look at me. Nora, when do you plan to start preparing for the upcoming trial and the Safe Passage archive platform? Let's set it for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I tore my gaze away from the open sea, turned off my phone, and slipped it back into my coat pocket. I've already registered the domain name for the official Safety Corridor Archives website. The first batch of documents to be uploaded includes shipping companies' internal duplicate invoices, records of unauthorized modifications, and the offshore ledgers we intercepted tonight. Once they've been reviewed and approved, they'll be made public in real time. Zhao Gang watched my decisive and efficient manner and couldn't help but smile and shake his head. You're something else. Kid, you're even more efficient than the veteran detectives in our Economic Crime Investigation Division. All right. The Maritime Safety Administration will fully cooperate with security arrangements for tomorrow's press conference and hearing. Zhou Min's mother, who was standing beside me, stepped forward and clasped my hands tightly. Though her eyes were red and swollen, her face showed a hint of relief. Nora, I really don't know how to thank you. If it weren't for you, not only would my daughter have died under mysterious circumstances, but those murderers would still be getting away with it, pocketing the insurance money. I clasped her rough fingers in mine, my tone gentle yet firm. Auntie, there's no need to thank me. We're all taking back control of our own destinies, aren't we? After saying goodbye to Zhao Gang and his family, I boarded the subway alone to return to the city. The train car was packed with commuters during the morning rush hour, and the air was filled with the aroma of coffee and various breakfast foods. The office workers around me were hurrying along, scrolling through their phones and whispering about the headline that had just gone viral that morning. Follow-up on the sinking of the luxury cruise ship Ocean Star. Maritime Authority and Economic Crime Unit raid shipping giant. Multiple executives arrested. A young woman sitting next to me was holding her phone and exclaiming to her friend, "Oh my gosh! Check out this newly launched Safety Channel Archives website. It's torn this shipping company's dirty secrets wide open, leaving nothing hidden. The founder is so awesome. She's truly a shining example of modern women." My friend leaned in to look at the screen. Yeah, I heard it was started by a young woman named Nora, together with the victims' families. No fluff, just hard evidence. So cool. I calmly looked away, lowered my head, and took a sip of warm water from my paper cup. Just then, my phone screen lit up with a notification for a new email. It was the 10,000th volunteer registration application sent from the Safety Corridor Archive backend. The subway rumbled deeply as it traveled through the long tunnel, Not far ahead lay the small apartment I rented all to myself. The desk lamp on my desk was quietly waiting for me to return and begin another day of independent living. No more rushing. No more mental exhaustion. And certainly no need to make excuses for anyone's unreasonable demands. I looked at my reflection in the car window. That young face was filled with a clarity and resolve I had never felt before. On this desert island that is life. This time, I'm firmly in control of the steering wheel.